can see in the biography, he's what I call the co-convener of our group. It's really Martin and Neil who get all the communications out and look after the website and so on. So we're very, very grateful and dependent on Martin. We're lucky that he lives in Bucks, despite being responsible for moths in Berkshire. But over to you, Martin.
Okay. Thanks very much, Rick. And I'm sure we'll come back to this, but I also want to say a very big thank you to you for all the work you put into making today happen. And I've thoroughly enjoyed it so far. I hope you have as well. And it's been a really good day. So I'm due to be giving a bit of an overview of invertebrate recording in Buckinghamshire, and some of the things that I'm going to touch on have already been mentioned by previous speakers, so I won't dwell on too much length where we've already covered them. But we are here to talk about invertebrate recording, and let's have a bit of a think about what it all adds up to. This signpost was from one of our field meetings a couple of years ago, and I just really liked it. There's a signpost that tells you where to go to find the insects. It's just a really nice thing to have. And I thought I'd start off with one of the classic Buckinghamshire landscapes. But to do that, I need to have a computer that works. One of the things that I've always enjoyed about studying insects and recording insects is that you can do it anywhere at any time, pretty much. And I happened to find myself in the middle of Aylesbury last year. I think my wife was busy doing something and I had a couple of hours to kill. So I spent a bit of time wandering up and down here and ended up with a lethal species list. And one of the things I noticed was this rather straggly little alder that was poking its head up from the edge of the canal. So I thought, I wonder, would it have an alder leaf beetle on this little scraggly bit of alder in the middle of Aylesbury? And of course, which has got quite an amazing story in itself. This is a species that pretty much went extinct in Britain about, I don't know, 50 years ago, something like that. And then a population popped up around the Liverpool area, and another one popped up around the Southampton area. There's another dot connection there, which may be that they were brought back into the country. And since then, they've spread out and met in the middle, and you find them pretty much everywhere now, certainly on alder trees, sometimes on other trees as well. So you can do entomology pretty much anywhere. And the Bucks Invertebrate Group has been encouraging people to do exactly that for quite a long time now. The first meeting here back in 1989, I wasn't there at the first meeting. I think I first got involved with the Invertebrate Group in the early 1990s. So, but quite a few people in this photo are here today. Sadly, there's one or two people that we've lost along the way, but there have been a number of very long-standing members of the group right from the beginning. And in the very first Bucks Invertebrate Group newsletter, there was, as you would expect, an amazing contribution on rotifers from Eric, with some of his wonderful illustrations included. So there's a number of sort of themes that have been part of the Invertebrate Group all the way through. We've always had this focus on recording, but recording with a purpose, and trying to make those records available and made use of for conservation purposes as well, and indeed for research. And the idea, we've got an invertebrate group in Buckinghamshire. Some counties have a moth group or a beetle group or whatever. We've always had a general invertebrate group. And I think it has been a sort of feature of the group that we are genuinely interested in a whole range of features, from rotifers to tardigrades to butterflies to everything else in between. And for me, again, it's one of the fascinating things about attending the group meetings has just been to sort of get that range of interest and enthusiasm and experience from so many different people. And we have had lots of very knowledgeable and enthusiastic people taking part over the years. We've also benefited from very long-term support right from the beginning from the Bucks Museum and the Buckinghamshire Records Centre, and indeed from the Wildlife Trust and various other groups as well. But the Museum and the Records Centre have been absolutely integral to keeping the group going. Most of our indoor meetings are held at the Museum Resource Centre at Alton, and we're very grateful for them for letting us continue to do so. We do produce a bulletin for the Invertebrate Group, and have done for right from the beginning, People like Peter Hall and Martin Albertini have played a very long-standing role in bringing that together, and now Neil Fletcher's taken that job on. And over the years, we've started to introduce photos and then colour photos, and at the moment we've got this wonderful, colourful document with lots and lots of different perspectives and different types of insect groups featured, and of course reports of what our own field trips are getting up to and so on. So if you ever find yourself with a spare few moments, go onto the website and have a trawl back through all the old Invertebrate Group newsletters. There are all sorts of fascinating articles hidden away in there. So I thought I'd try and have a bit of a look at what all these records are looking like at the moment. And this is only based on the records in iRecord, because those were the ones that I could access easily. So it is a partial view. The Record Centre and the county recorders do take in records from other places as well as from iRecord. But I think the patterns that this shows are probably common across the board. So for the last 10 years, there are just under 400,000 records of invertebrates on iRecord, around 5,000 species, around 4,000 recorders. So that's quite a lot of recording activity. And as you often find when you look at recording scheme data, there's a small number of people who contribute lots and lots and lots of records. And then there's a whole load of people who contribute very small numbers of records, but nonetheless, if those 1,900 people hadn't all put in their one single record, we'd have 1,900 fewer records. So it does all add up, and I think this is one of the real strengths of this. Any individual record is not going to change the world, but when you bring them all together, it does add up to a really useful and helpful resource. So what are we recording? In terms just of the numbers of records, you'll be unsurprised to see that butterflies come out well ahead. This is partly because the iRecord system includes all the butterfly transect data, all those regular walks that people do that generate a huge amount of data, but it also reflects the obvious thing that butterflies are a well-known and popular group that many, many people get involved with recording. Moths following along well behind, and then there's a rather smaller tail of lots of different insect groups for which we have rather few records. So I'd say that's just looking at the total number of records for each of those groups. If we look at it in a slightly different way, what are the total number? Oh God, I forgot about this one. Yeah, so this is from going back to 2011. We did a questionnaire amongst the membership of the Invertebrate Group, and these were the invertebrate groups that people felt confident about identifying, and they pretty much do match the sequence of where we get the most records from. So again, not really very surprising, but butterflies and moths are clearly the ones that more people feel that they have some confidence with, followed by things like dragonflies and grasshoppers. So that's all numbers of records. This is a similar looking chart, but this time it's showing the numbers of species that get recorded over the last 10 years in Buckinghamshire. And this time moths come out as the winners, as having the most numbers of species recorded. So just looking at the iRecord data, there's about 1,200 species from the 2,500 or so that occur in the UK. But that is just the last 10 years, and it is just iRecord. Pretty impressive total though. For coming in second place, the true flies with just under 1,200 of the 7,000 UK species. So we've got a way to go yet before we're going to complete our catalogue of Buckinghamshire's flies. But I think it does sort of give quite an interesting perspective on the range of species that people are recording. And some of the groups down the bottom here don't actually have all that many species in them, so they're never going to increase all that much in terms of numbers of species. And a third way of looking at the same sort of information, this is the number of records per species in each of those groups. So for butterflies, on average, over 10 years, we've got 4,500 records for each species as an average. Dragonflies are the next ones, which are less than 500, but still pretty good per species, and then it falls rapidly away. And for all those groups in the bottom half of the table, these are the groups for which in Buckinghamshire on iRecord, we get fewer than one record per species per year. Which means if you're trying to use this to sort of assess what's changing over time, you've got very, very little data to go on for a lot of these groups. And in some of them, that's probably not terribly surprising, there are some invertebrate groups in the bottom half of this table that are really quite challenging to find and to recognise and to record. So it's unsurprising in that sense, but it does sort of pick up on the themes that we had from several speakers this morning about the fact that there's always more that can be done, and that there's always more things to find out and to get the records in to give us a bit more information on what's actually happening to all these wonderful species that are out there. But I don't want that to seem as a negative thing. There is a lot of recording being done, and those records are valuable and do get made use of. And the Invertebrate Group has done its bit to try and encourage people to get involved over the years. So the typical things that we do, apart from producing the bulletin, is we have indoor meetings in the winter, and we have a series of field meetings in the summer. And again, I'm very grateful to my colleague Neil for currently being the field meeting organiser and putting a lot of work into keeping the field meeting programme going. If you've never been to one of our field meetings, you are very, very welcome to give them a try and come along and meet up with other like-minded people and hopefully get to see a whole range of interesting things out in the field. We run moth trapping sessions quite a lot as well. One thing we haven't done so much of in recent years is running identification workshops. This is one that we did in Milton Keynes quite a long time ago.
Nearly 20 years.
20 years, was it? Right, okay.
18 probably.
And again, this was with the help of the museum and the collections at the museum. I think we were looking at ground beetles on this particular occasion, but we did a few others as well. Perhaps that's something we ought to think about doing again if there was the demand and the interest to actually make that happen for some different groups. So that's some of the things that the Invertebrate Group gets up to. And there are some interesting and special species in Buckinghamshire. Buckinghamshire, of course, is a landlocked county, more or less in the middle of England, and it's not necessarily the sort of place where you'd expect new things to turn up. But we heard of some examples in the talks this morning. This is one that I live quite close to Prince's Risborough, and I've always sort of had at the back of my mind, wouldn't it be lovely to find this bee again one day? And of course, no such luck. I've not managed to find it at all. And the only British record back in 1939 was from Prince's Risborough. Who knows where that came from or what was going on at the time, but it's not been refound. We have had some other new to Britons from Buckinghamshire, and I was lucky enough to be involved in this lacewing back in 2006. I was doing some moth trapping in Wendover Woods, and this is actually quite a large lacewing. I tried to key it out, and then I got to the point of working out that I couldn't key it out, and it didn't seem to match anything in the key, at which point I got in touch with Colin Plant, who runs the recording scheme, is the expert on them, and Colin sorted it out, and we managed to publish that first record for Britain. As far as I'm aware, it wasn't seen again until 2012, and then Dave Wilton, in your garden, I think, Dave, was it?
Probably.
Yep. had another Buckinghamshire record in 2013, but it doesn't seem to have got established, and as far as we can tell at the moment, it is just a sort of vagrant species that comes across from time to time. It's associated with spruce, and you would have thought places like Wendover Wood would offer plenty of habitat for it, but as I say, it does not seem to have got established in this case. Burnham beaches have gone even better than finding things new to Britain, though. We now have records of things new to science from Burnham beaches, and I'm sure they're not the only examples that there have ever been in Buckinghamshire, but Helen Reid passed on a couple of these examples from the, as Helen, or I can't remember if it was Mick or Helen, one mentioned earlier on about all the amazing work that's been done at Burnham beaches to investigate insects and other invertebrates and to manage habitats for them. And as part of those, there have been these 2 flies discovered as new to science, and some parasitic wasps are in the pipeline as well that are going to be new species. So even here in Buckinghamshire, we can make these discoveries and add to the world knowledge of what's going on. Recording is great. I love doing it. I've spent most of my life getting out there doing wildlife recording of one sort or another. But it's not the only thing that we need to do in order to try and sort of look after our wildlife. And as I say, the members of the Invertebrate Group, although the group itself is a small group, there's a limit to what it can actually do, but members of the group do get involved in a much wider range of activities, including things like advising on the local wildlife site system and indeed sometimes providing information for the national sites of special scientific interest. So the data does get fed into trying to protect individual sites. Some of our members are very well known for being involved with site management and Dancer's End with Mick, and Helen at Burnham we've mentioned, Ched George and the work he's done at Euston Bank, thank you. mind went blank for a moment there. And a range of other people have got very heavily involved in site management, and having entomologists involved with site management is a really, really good thing in my opinion, because it does mean that you can get that sort of entomological view of what a habitat should consist of, and get that feeding into things like the management plans and the work that actually gets done on the ground. Some members of the group have done amazing things in actually studying the ecology of species, either in the wild or by raising them in captivity and learning more about what they actually need. And there are still lots of species, even some of the sort of high-profile rare species, where we still don't actually know very much about their life cycle and about what habitat management might be good for them. So that's a whole area there that you don't need to be able to identify hundreds and hundreds of species. If you just pick out one or two and give them some detailed study, you can add significantly to our knowledge there. And then this idea of being ambassadors for bugs or insects or whatever you want to call them, and just trying to enthuse people about them. Insects do get a pretty bad press a lot of the time, and certainly the sort of stories that get into the tabloid newspapers are often very, very negative indeed. And it's, again, something that we could all play a role in, is trying to counter that a little bit and just point out that insects do an awful lot of good and are fascinating and in many cases beautiful creatures, and that they do need our support. And one thing that the Invertebrate Group does, or at least in recent years has done every year, is this mothing event at College Lake, where we run traps overnight and invite the public in to come and see what has been found. And these have been sort of very popular over the last few years, and we've had lots of people coming through and learning about moths, and hopefully dispelling some of the prejudices that they might have had about moths and the things that they get up to. So that's a really good thing to be doing as well. One story, again going back a few years now, back to 2011, but it's a nice little example of how all these things can come together. This is an orchard right up on the Bedfordshire border, and Andy Howard and Matt Dodds were visiting the orchard to advise on its management, and found this larva inside one of the old ancient damson trees, and they thought it might be one of these really rare beetles, the noble chafer, which is known to have larvae living in such places. So they got some photos of it and put it up on one of the websites. Mark Telfer and myself went and actually visited the orchard as a result of that, and had a poke round and managed to confirm more of the larvae. And these larvae leave behind particularly distinctive droppings. The frass that they leave in the tree holes can be recognised as being the right species. So Mark and I were able to confirm it from there, and then both of us found it at other sites nearby as well subsequently. And this was all as a result of the first people having gone there and been sufficiently sort of interested and knowledgeable to realise they might have found something interesting and take a photo of it, which could then be checked, and we could then sort of properly record it. That did turn out to be the first Buckingham record for about 100 years for this biodiversity action plan for priority species. And that's fed into some of the other work that was already going on to try and conserve orchards and give orchard habitats a bit of a profile, because there are lots of really good things that live in orchards, and that orchards are a good habitat for. And the Record Centre, BMERC, have subsequently promoted some pheromone trapping for this species, and there have been a few more records in other places in the county as well. So from this initial sighting that somebody was good enough to send in, it sort of spread out into confirming the record and going to other sites and getting a bit more protection for them, and just getting a bit more focus on this species that we didn't even know was in the county beforehand. And it is a rather spectacular species. I'm very jealous of Matt, because I've still never seen the adult, I've only ever seen the larva, but it is a really lovely beetle. They seem to only exist for quite a short time as adults, so you've got to be in the right place at the right time to actually see one. But yeah, lovely things. So, do we need to conserve insects? There's been a lot of focus in the news in recent years about the idea of insect apocalypse and the declines that you hear about. And there have been some pretty wild headlines, and the way the press likes to pick up and sensationalise things from time to time. It's really quite a complex story, as you might expect, given the enormous numbers of species. And if you're speaking about insects globally, there is no way that you could really come up with a single measure that's going to tell you whether things are getting better or worse or whatever. But there is evidence for declines in a lot of places at a lot of times. Exactly what it adds up to globally is difficult to say, but there's certainly cause to be concerned about them. And this was a rather nice graphic that was published in one of the papers in association with this fairly recently. Again, looking at the sort of global threats to insects, but I think pretty much all of these also have a local sort of implication as well. I think most of those categories we could probably find examples of in Buckinghamshire where species and habitats are under threat from one thing or another. So it is a bit of a depressing story, but it does sort of redouble the fact that we do need information to try and make the case about this and to try and argue for things to be got better. And one of the other papers that was published in the same journal as that previous graphic did try to pick out some actions that any one of us could take to try and address this situation. And I think I won't sort of read all these out, but I think there's some, this again was sort of thinking from a global and possibly with a slightly USA bias to it. But even so, I think these are all things that many of us could think about doing. But these are individual things, and they're great to do, and they really can be very, 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 very beneficial. Some insects do survive in quite small areas, and by doing these small targeted things, you can make a difference. But alongside that, of course, there are these bigger issues around climate change and around land use and around planning issues, etc., that are beyond the power of any one individual to deal with, and those are the sort of really difficult political things that I think we do all need to try and engage with, but it is sort of really tough long-term work to try and get some of these things moving in a better direction. Again, this idea of being ambassadors was one of the number 6 there, counter negative perceptions of insects, and alongside that they came up with this idea of the 5 Ps of things that you could tell people that insects are really good for. Pollinators, prey, physical decomposers, progress in science, and providing pleasure. So they've had to slightly force some of the P's into that bit, but it is quite a nice way of remembering some of the things that insects do actually do for us, and the reasons why we should value them and try and encourage other people to value them. So if you do want to get more involved in insect recording, there are loads of fantastic resources out there nowadays, and I've just picked out 2 here. Paul Brock has done some wonderful books, some of them published by Peter Creed, who's here today. I'm afraid this isn't one of Peter's. I picked the wrong one, sorry, Peter. But all of Paul's books are really good, and that for me, that if you want just a single general guide to insects, that's the best one. It won't let you identify everything. There's just too many insects. You couldn't possibly have them all in one book, but it is a really good starting place. And there are some fantastic online resources, and I expect most of you will be familiar with Stephen Falk and his absolutely amazing collections of photos on Flickr, particularly good for bees and flies, and he covers a few other groups as well. But there's loads of other stuff out there. One of the difficulties is just knowing what there is and how you navigate your way and find the right book or the right website. And the best way to do that is to talk to other people and contact us in the Invertebrate Group or get involved in some of the social media if you're into that side of things, and just ask for people's advice, and there's plenty of people who are willing and able to point you in the right direction. There's lots of entomology that can be done with a camera, and again we touched on that in some of the talks this morning about the value of photos for records. There's also a lot of entomology that cannot be done with a camera. There are the challenges of identifying species in some of the groups do require specimens to be taken, and these days increasingly the use of DNA approaches to identifying things and working out what species we've got becomes important. But that's not, one isn't better than the other. We need both approaches, and we need people doing both approaches. If you are starting down the path of wanting to get involved in the more detailed microscope work, again, it's the sort of thing that members of the Invertebrate Group are very willing to help with. Yeah, do get in touch with us. But photographic recording is great and does come up with all sorts of discoveries, as we saw with the noble Che, for example. And just going back again, you don't need to be the world's expert to make a contribution to this. As soon as you can recognise even one species, you're in a position to start recording it and adding to the knowledge about it. I did want to pick up on one trend which I find a bit worrying at the moment, and which is this increasing need from organisations to impose restrictions on people going out and doing invertebrate recording. And I've experienced this myself quite a few times recently, and it is organisations like the Wildlife Trust and the Woodland Trust and a few of the others. And you get in touch with them and say you want to go and do some recording, and you're then faced with pages and pages of documentation and risk assessments and demands for insurance. And I can sort of see it, and when I've queried it with them, the message I get is that it's our insurers, they insist that we do it this way. But I do feel we need to fight back against that, to some extent at least. We are in danger of making entomology a really hard thing to get involved with as an amateur. If you follow the rules and get in touch and ask permission, you're then faced with all these barriers. Whereas if you want to go out and take your potentially dangerous dog and walk it around your nature reserve, no problem at all. Nobody's going to ask you to fill a form in to do that. And it just feels to me that we are getting the balance wrong in some places here. Quite what we do about that, I don't know. There are all these difficulties around the whole insurance and duty of care and all these things that are very important, but it does feel to me that it's going too far the wrong way at the moment. And talking about specimens, I also wanted to just sort of feature again the fact that the museum has been such a strong supporter of the Invertebrate Group. The museum does have considerable insect collections, many of them with a Buckinghamshire focus, of course. And although they're not often out on public display in the Aylesbury Museum, you can make an appointment to go and see and use the collections at the Halton collections. And indeed, you can make a contribution to the Halton collections. Their capacity isn't infinite for taking on new stuff, but there are areas that I'm sure Mike Palmer will be happy to talk to people about. And for entomology, it is having these sort of reference collections to refer back to is such an important part of keeping track of the records and checking identifications and so on. And the final thing I wanted to touch on was the image recognition, which I think we mentioned once or twice earlier this morning. This is something that is still feels quite new. It's been around a few years now, but there are an increasing number of apps and websites that allow you to take a photo and stick it in, and it will tell you what it thinks it is. And the technology for this is developing at a very rapid pace, and they can be really, really useful. It's the sort of thing that when I was getting into entomology, and sometimes I'd have an insect and it would literally take me years to work out what it is until I managed to show it to somebody who knew it. But a lot of these now, you can get an instant answer, and a lot of the time it will be the right answer, but not always. And they do, the word of warning here is always to check the answers that you're being given. So these are some examples using the iRecord app and just throwing some photos at it. And these are ones where it came straight away back with exactly the right identification. Even for the, this is one of the, it always takes me ages to work out which of these green bugs I'm looking at, but the app got there straight away and it was right. And these are some ones where it was not so much right or just wasn't sure. And some of these are sort of a bit more useful than others. So the fly there is one of those species. I'm still not entirely sure which one of those species it is, so the app was absolutely right to give me both and not try and decide between them. But that's the one on the left there is not a Buckinghamshire weevil. It's a rather rare coastal species which the app doesn't seem to recognise at all. And yeah, it got one in the wrong genus, one in the right genus, but didn't get the right species. So they're not infallible, but they are getting better. Every time I do one of these talks, each time I try and find these examples where it goes wrong, it becomes harder. It took me a long time to find some photos that the app couldn't identify. So they are improving all the time. Where they do sometimes go wrong is particularly with the rarer species, because of course the apps are based on all the photos that have been used to train them. And sometimes if you get a rare species that looks very, very similar to a common species, it will always tell you it's the common species because that's the only one it knows about. So the message is, really useful tool, but it's not a replacement for everything else. It's another tool to use alongside the books and talking to people and getting your records verified. It's all part of that picture. But it does provide a very helpful way in, I think. So, why should we continue recording invertebrates in Buckinghamshire? You've seen me do, some of you have seen me do these sorts of talks before, and there are lots of reasons for recording wildlife in general, including invertebrates in Buckinghamshire. the records really do go to a lot of important uses. The Record Centre, Julia and her colleagues at the Record Centre do an absolutely brilliant job of trying to bring all this information together and make sure that invertebrate knowledge feeds into the places that it needs to, even when those places aren't actually very keen on receiving that knowledge. Julia does a fantastic job of feeding into them. And things like the local nature recovery strategy, which is a very big bit of somewhat bureaucratic process that's being worked through at the moment. Our records do go into that, the local wildlife sites, they do go into. Some of the other groups, like Butterfly Conservation, does fantastic work. We saw those thousands and thousands of butterfly records, but they are all very much analysed and looked at and reported back on. Lots of fantastic information comes from them. If you use systems like iRecord that also share their data with the national schemes, and there's a whole other level that they go up to there as well. We do still produce hard copy atlases. This is the latest one for crick beetles, which includes a lot of Buckinghamshire records, including one or two special species from Dart's End again. So they go into there, they go up onto the National Biodiversity Network Atlas for the whole of the country. There are research papers written on all this recording activity. And then they feed into things like the government biodiversity indicators and the RSPB and other organisations' state of nature reports. So just by putting your one record in somewhere at the beginning of the system, it can potentially go out to all these wonderful other places and be put to quite a lot of really important uses. So those are the sort of reasons why you should be a good person and do your duty. But alongside that, I hope you also have some fun. And by actually coming along to field meetings and getting out there and just doing your own thing, a bit of bug hunting here and there and sending your records in, it is fun, it's a good thing to do, good for your health, good for everybody else as well. Why aren't we all doing it?